One of my first memories was when I was about 3 years old, and I was walking home with the maid, and I saw all these churches up in flames, and that was the anarchists, because for the first time Spain had a republic, and the anarchists were part of a splinter group who wanted chaos. And so there was the Civil War began. My father was a very powerful, very brilliant economist. And he was part of the Catalonian government. But then when the anarchists they had put a price on his head.
Wow.
And he dressed me up with a uniform, so that if we were stopped, oh, what a cute
Little boy.
a little girl, but well, she has the uniform of the anarchist or whatever, and they would let us go. It was a very scary time, and he had been invited by the Venezuelan government to go and organize their economy, because it was the beginning of the oil boom in Venezuela. And he didn't want to do it at the beginning, of course, he had his life. So we left and we went to Venezuela.
I traveled to Caracas by air, of course, landing at Maiquetía, right on the shore of the Caribbean. Then we started up through the mountains on one of the most remarkable highways in the world.
Caracas was a beautiful city at the time, surrounded by the wonderful mountain, El Ávila. We had a big house, we had governors, we had tutors.
What was your mother like?
She's a very intelligent, very austere type of woman.
Mm-hmm.
And in another situation, in another time, she would have been very successful, and in this situation, she was unhappy, and she was totally aloof from all the children. But it wasn't a happy marriage.
So, all right, so you're in Venezuela, you're a child.
We're in Venezuela when we were a child. My father decided that we were going to be kept in the confines of the house and garden. We were not going to go out. I was the second child, and apparently when I was born, my father's best friend, who was a doctor, said, otra meona.
What's meona mean?
Another pisser.
Another pisser. And that was it, who cared about the second one?
Right.
And it wasn't a boy.
Right.
So
right.
I felt that I was never acknowledged as a person,
right.
or as a human being. And so my salvation was books. The minute I learned how to read, that was it. There was another pivotal moment in my life, and I still remember it.
Okay.
That I saw my parents had their friends, on every Sunday, those awful bourgeois lunches, they went on forever, And I remember standing there and saying, I don't want this life. I will not have this life.
Right.
And I will not be a bourgeois, like that. I mean, I didn't use the word bourgeois because I didn't know it, but I knew I didn't want that kind of marriage. I didn't want that kind of a life.
Right.
And
right.
so, since then it was just art and spirit. Well, after the war, I think that my father was some kind of involved with the CIA because
Really?
there was this very strange guy who was a Russian, a white Russian, and he used to supposed to come and give us math lessons, except that he never gave us any lessons, and he and father would go off and
Plot somewhere.
yeah. So I think that because the minute the war ended, we got visas, to New York, and very hard to get a visa. All of us got visas. And I think, whatever bad things he's ever done, I forgive him because he insisted that his girls be educated. And my mother said, let them go to secretarial school, and my father said, no, they're going to go to the best colleges. And so we went to Barnard. And that was when my life began.
So tell us about Barnard.
Well, for the first time, I never had any friends because, we were so isolated.
Yeah.
And I said, people who thought like me, and girls and boys, all of a sudden, boys liked me.
You were very beautiful at that time as well.
Well, I was convinced about it.
Right.
But, at least I knew that when I went into dances,
Boys wanted to dance.
boys wanted to dance with me.
It was very simple times.
Yeah.
That's great.
And I wanted to write, and I wanted to be a writer. And then the other very important thing that happened was that Dylan Thomas, you know who Dylan Thomas is?
Mm-mm.
Dylan Thomas was a brilliant boy. He was very famous, and a drunkard. And he came to read at Barnard, and I know I was maybe a sophomore, and the all the professors, they were laughing at him because he was a bohemian,
Right.
plus a little drunk,
Right.
and then he began to read his poetry, and he read magnificent, and I thought, this is it, I'm on that side.
Right.
And then a few months later, I met Stanley, who was, a poet. So after I graduated, I went back to Spain, and he followed me, we couldn't get married in Spain because he was Jewish and I was Catholic, and at that time in Spain you couldn't get married.
Wow.
So with different religions. So we all went with my mother and my two sisters. We went to Tangier, and I got married in Tangier.
Zooby zooby zoo.
You were telling me at the time that you were already modeling at this point because you told
That's
me.
right, yeah.
So how did
How did you
modeling
get it?
come
Yeah.
about?
Well,
modeling.
because one of my best friends, her stepfather was Alexander Lieberman, who was the head of Vogue and all of that, and all these magazines. And she would invite me to their house, and I met Dali there. I met Greta Garbo. It was that kind of thing. And he said, you're beautiful. You should be a model. So, and he sent me to to a very good photographer. And he said, well, first of all, you have to lose 10 pounds. So I wasn't that interested. It was a very easy way to make money.
Right.
We were very poor, the bohemian life.
Right.
See what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars.
And at that time, I was living in Paris in this, had been the studio of Noguchi, the sculptor.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a very nice, wonderful, it was a wonderful time to be in Paris.
Fill my heart with song and let me sing.
We would go on bicycle rides in the middle of the night all through Paris without any worries,
Right.
It was
Beautiful.
Right.
Yeah, it was a great
Like
time. So we he wrote poetry, I wrote, and I modeled, and We played chess, and Stanley was very social and knew a lot of people, so we met very important, very so-called, like influential and writers and things.
So
like
tell us
that.
about Dali. What was that experience like, meeting Dali?
To me, he was a buffoon.
Right.
They were sitting on a bench like this. I still remember he was on one end. I think that Gerda Garbo was on another. No, Marlene Dietrich was on the other. And it was like he was in his own play, and with his mustache, and he was just persona.
How did it end with Stanley?
It was over. We were fighting all the time.
You were too young to get married.
We were too young.
Right. So how did you get back to New York? How did that come up?
So I kind of at one point had felt it's enough. I didn't know where I was going, and so I met this Greek millionaire, and he was much older, and he wanted to marry me and take me to Athens, and my mother thought that's a great idea.
Right.
And
So how long did that last?
well, I how you're unconscious
Knows it's wrong.
knows it's wrong, but your mind says, okay, I will have stability, and I had beautiful clothes, and but being a housewife in Athens. So I said, look, I have to go back to New York because I wasn't even divorced yet,
Right.
and get my divorce, and then I'll come back and we'll get married. I rented this wonderful apartment on Lexington and 60 something with a great view, and Stanley lent me Cézanne to put on the wall and so on.
A real Cézanne?
A real Cézanne. He at that time he had become an art dealer.
Wow.
And started to make a lot of money. And I gave a party with someone, a New Year's Eve party, and someone dragged in this guy called Peter Nicholson. And so I remember I was wearing this fantastic red dress that I had from Paris, and he thought I was an heiress. But your father really had the gift of God.
Really?
Oh,
How
absolutely.
did he lay it on you?
Well, life has to have a meaning, and in fact, I'm going to give up art and really dedicate myself to social work and all that kind of crap.
Of course, there was no intention behind that.
Who knows? He may have passed his mind for about 2 minutes.
Right.
So he said, come to my studio. And he had a studio on 10th Street between University and
Washington,
Broadway.
Yeah.
Wonderful. It's a wonderful loft. And so I went, and there he was with a pristine white shirt with, rolled up. And he was all set up.
Oh, hi, just welcome.
Yeah. So, but he was fascinating from the get-go. First, I think he was a real artist.
Right.
And art was very important to him, and that was very attractive to me.
Right.
He was a rebel. He was just his own person. I remember that we were talking, and it was at the very beginning, and I heard a voice from up there, and it was his mom, and he said, "Take care of my son."
It was Peter's mom.
Yeah. At the beginning, it was wonderful. It was a time when, there were a lot of parties, and we all drank a lot.
And this is late 60s or early 60s?
This is beginning 60s, middle 60s.
Okay.
It was still the abstract expressionists, you know, the Cedar Bar. The Cedar Bar was where the biggest names in abstract expressionism met, you know, de Kooning, Pollock, and so on and so on. And, and you know, they all got drunk. I mean, the whole point was they talked and they got drunk.
Right. So what was New York like back then?
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. It was wonderful. I remember walking in the village, walking everywhere. There was such a terrific sense of, you know, the art world was very small at the time. It wasn't, you know, like, it hadn't exploded into the big
Right.
business. It was a sense of camaraderie and a big party, and people were involved in something interesting and pursuing art, and
There was purpose.
there was a. Soho wasn't Soho. Soho was this mess
Right.
of all decrepit buildings. It was legal to be used as a studio, but not to live. So a lot of the artists kind of hid, you know, the kitchen and you know.
Right.
But there were groups of artists, you know, and so Ornette Coleman was one of our group, and we had meetings, and then after our building, there were other buildings that began, and my brother, who was working with the city planning, was the one who came up with the name Soho.
Really?
But it was just south of Houston,
Right.
you know, Soho. Our loft was on Prim Street, and it was on the 6th floor. Ornette Coleman, I think, had the 3rd floor, and then we had the basement.
So tell us a little bit about Ornette Coleman. How did?
He was a very sweet guy. Very sweet guy.
And tell us a little bit about who he is. Like, I mean, for
Well, Ornette Coleman, he was a great pioneer of jazz. I mean, he changed jazz. It wasn't that at that time he was that successful, you know.
Yeah.
But in the underground,
Yeah.
he was known. And you know, it sounds great, but you know, he would practice, and he was noisy, and you were in my belly when he was on top of us. So if you got anything to do with the music, it must have been for Ornette. I just tell you. I was teaching, I got a job teaching at Queen's College, and I was a professor, and I would come home, and there would be little James, and it would be Peter, and they were each one pulling at me, and it was a very hard time in my life. I kind of, by that time, I knew that your father wasn't going to, he didn't want success. He just didn't want success. And so we were going to be hand to mouth the whole time. You know, it was horrible. We were very, very, very poor.
Right.
You know, we needed money, and so we rented this loft to this group, and they became the Weathermen. You know, which was a very violent arm of
And so, what was it about this basement loft? Wasn't there a printing press?
Yeah, they had a printing press and so on. And then, you know, one time, James, you know, it's a baby, and the babysitter were trying to come into the building, and there was this Black Panther with a gun saying, you know, nobody's allowed into the building. It was scary.
Right.
It was scary because we thought the Weathermen, my God, they can just probably making bombs and will.
So were the Weathermen and the Black Panthers in cahoots with one another, or
No, they were fighting.
They were fighting.
They were fighting, and I don't know the details at this point.
Right.
I don't know.
But you weren't allowed in the building.
We weren't allowed in the building. But eventually, of course, we were. But
Right.
it was anyway. We sold the loft, and I got pregnant, and there was no place to go. He didn't particularly want to be married. He just wanted to continue the way we were. And he told me, if you want to have children, you will have to take care of them yourself.
Right.
You know, you can't count me out.
So maybe this is a good time to rewind a little bit into Peter's life and tell us a little bit about what you know about his childhood and how he came up.
Well, he had a wonderful, lovely childhood till he was 6. His mother adored him. His father was a nice man, so-called, and then his mother died of influenza. It was at the time when all these, people died, and his father sent him off to some grandparents that he didn't know too well, and there he was, a 6-year-old with his old people. But he was very unhappy. I mean, he was very unhappy, and he thought his mother was a writer, and wrote those romance novels, and he had read them all.
Oh, wow.
So he thought that his father was out in the moors of Scotland mourning his wife. And one day his father came, and his father would only come once a year and give him a Christmas present, spend the day, and then disappear to mourn, right?
Right.
And one day he came back and said, come with me. I have something to tell you. I'm remarried and I have 2 children. And he didn't know a thing about it. So
That's really harsh.
Yeah.
How old was he when that happened, you said?
I think 14,
So do you think that obviously affected?
Yeah,
the
of course.
rest of his life?
of course.
How did he get into art?
He was fascinating story. He was he is an inventor. He was an inventor. So he had got a job in some rubber company, Pirelli, and doing experiments, and he discovered how to extract the rubber from tires, because at that time and during the war it was very important to have. And so he was very pleased with that, and he went to his his boss and said, "Look, this is what happened." And the next day he was fired because they took over his invention. And so he thought, well, I need to be in something that is going to be entirely my own. And so that was art, and he went to art school.
Wow.
And he was very successful. The best times were when we were in La Jolla. That was the happiest time in my life.
Wow. Tell us about La Jolla.
Well, I went to get my dissertation, my PhD,
And how old were you at this point?
maybe 32, 33.
Uh-huh.
And we rented this nice funky house. At that point, we had become already quite involved with spirituality and meditation, and so we had a little yoga group who met once a week, and everybody took a lot of acid, and it was the 60s.
Right.
And smoked all the time, and so without my wanting to, boom! I got pregnant with James, and so I wrote my dissertation while I was pregnant, and he was born, and it was just such a happy time.
Right.
And Peter was painting wonderful paintings. Yeah, we had this little yoga group, and Richard Simmons said one day, "Oh, I heard about this guy who's quite interesting. Let's go and hear him." I had this basket from Palma with a baby, so I brought it, and I was sitting on the edge. It was in an auditorium, and I was sitting on a chair next to the. And so Subramania, this charismatic, handsome person, comes down and he looks into the basket and he said, "You have a very old soul there." And of course, that totally bought me,
Hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah. And so we all became very involved with Subramania.
So what was Subramania? I mean, tell us about.
Subramania was, he called it at one point Christian yoga. He said that in another lifetime we had all been this group that formed around him in La Jolla of students from the university, that we had all been itinerant players in the Middle Ages. So we formed this group called the Actinics, and we would go from town to town doing the
Like a minstrel show? There?
yeah, putting on this little play. It was so, and at the end, I came in with James in a little carriage. I mean, that was. But of course, it was the time when everybody was crazy.
But crazy, but it was a time where everybody was making so much sense as well. I mean, it was a time where, consciousness was changing.
Exactly. Well, we all thought that it was a new world being born in front of our eyes. The whole 60s, was about a new way of looking at things, a new way of being with each other, a new way of love, at least that was at the beginning. So,
and Subramaniam had a group as well.
He had a group, we had meetings, we had teaching.
Did it feel like a cult at this time? Or
I know it was a cult. I didn't, at the time, we didn't think it was a cult. He could have been extremely popular because he was charismatic, he was good looking, he was American, he knew how to dress, but I think he just wanted to play with people's minds.
So what was his message? I mean, was there a philosophy behind his group?
Look, but the whole thing is that eventually you become enlightened. You realize that what this is all an illusion anyway, and you become enlightened. We were looking for some new world and and then you get slowly more and more and more, and then they frighten you. If you go out into the world, this is right. You're going to lose the chance of being enlightened and so on. He became more and more strict. Women should be at home choppy vegetables. It got to the insane point there. A woman was not allowed to talk to a man except through her husband. If the electric guy came to look at your electricity, you were not supposed to talk to him. You would have to wait till your husband was there. It was just insane. I never.
Yeah, you were like, fuck that.
There began to be rumors that there was something not kosher going on. He had a monastery in Kauai, and then it came out that they were all drinking vodka all the time, that he was buggering his monks, and in the meantime, his disciples were not supposed to have any sex. They were not supposed to, it was just horrible. And the more that the leader tightens the screws, the more people get, the more you are in it. It's just a horrible. He had a book, finally, a little booklet called The Book of Discipline.
Wow.
And you were supposed to, what you ate, what you wore, and so when that arrived, Peter said, absolutely forget it. To me, when the final break was, we were in Flushing, you remember that?
Right, yeah.
And we had started the school for the little kids, and you were 3 or 4, and and they were your friends, There were no other friends except those little kids there.
Yeah.
And then Subramania sent a message that unless Peter signed this book of discipline, nobody was allowed to play with you or.
Oh my God.
I know, it was just And that to me was, that was it.
Yeah, that's too much. You just
Too
gotta cross
much.
the
Don't
line
fuck with my
your children.
family.
Exactly.
Our next guest is Ana Maria Nicholson, and she is a
Holographic artist.
holographic artist. All right. What is a holographic artist?
Well, it's an artist that uses holography as a medium for their work.
All right.
And-
What is a holograph?
A hologram, actually, it's a three-dimensional image.
And how's it made?
It's made with lasers, and it's so real, and it's there, except it isn't really there. We split the beam of the laser beam in two.
In two.
And one laser beam illuminates the subject,
Right.
the other laser beam illuminates the piece of film,
Yeah.
and it's really the interference of these two beams or
Yeah.
wavefronts
Yeah.
that constitutes a hologram.
How did Long Island City come about?
We had all of this equipment for holography at that time. You know, we thought that holographic portraiture was going to take over the world, and we were going to be millionaires. Remember that? The portraits I've made are, and all these people who are now, most of them are dead. You know, Keith Haring, Philip Johnson, the architect, George Plimpton, the writer,
Walter Cronkite.
Walter Cronkite, David Byrne, Gloria Steinem. I did the Bishop of New York, Don Alejandro. We created this Center for the Holographic Arts, and it was just the most exciting time. We set up the equipment. The idea was to get artists from all over the world to come and use holography as part of their artistic vocabulary, and we've had over 100 artists. It lasted for 11 years.
Wow.
In retrospect, I feel I've done everything I could because I felt my mission was to have this magical, mystical medium. I mean, there you are. This matter is dematerialized. It's amazing. It's an amazing. And I felt it's a mission. And so I can't understand how it didn't take off. And when I talk to other holographers, we don't understand. You sit there and say, what happened? And so they're saying, one day, they will recognize our work.
And I think they will. I mean, it's one of those things that just.
I think so. I mean, people look at a hologram and they love it. They love it. You'll see when you have one here.
Right.
People are, oh my God!
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about your divorce with Peter?
No, but we were friends. We were friends till the end, till he died. And I will just say the last time about his death,
Right.
that James had this gallery, and we were in Miami, and it was so exciting. There was this.
Yeah. Wasn't it the Art Basel? He was part of Art Basel.
Yeah, Art Basel.
Yeah.
And so I called Peter and said, you have to come. He came. So we had this wonderful, James had sold 2 or 3 pieces, and we had this wonderful dinner with Peter, and we needed some wine, and Peter went and bought this bottle of wine, and for the first time in his life, he spent something like $12, which we had never done. And he was just, it was a very happy time. And he was very proud of James and so on. So there was he was staying at another hotel, and he said, I'm going to go to bed, And then we were going to meet the next morning, and he didn't show up, and he didn't show up. So I said, okay, let me call. And I called his hotel, and the woman on the other end said, oh my God, he just busted out. What?
Just busted out.
Busted out. And he had just fallen on the floor there in the lobby. And so we ran, it was just a few blocks. And there he was. and the paramedics were all there. So I walked in. You can't come in. I said, I'm his wife. I'm his wife. I'm his wife. And they were trying to resuscitate him, and they took him away and to the hospital. And I remember that they gave me a ride, and I said, look, how bad is it? Because he has a son in New York, and I don't. And he said, call him up, call him and tell him to come. And so, we waited, and he died. And I remember, and I talked to him because his soul was around, and I said, I have always loved you, truly loved you, and forgive me for anything I've done, and I forgive you for everything you've done. And that was the end of Peter.
You're in a new stage in your life.
Yeah, I'm
you're
in a new stage.
You're living in San Francisco, and where has your spirituality? I mean, it seems like spirituality is still the guiding force in your life.
Spirituality is the guiding force. Has always been the guiding force. As a child, I mean, I remember I wanted to be a mystic. I didn't want to be a star, a movie star. I wanted to be a mystic.
Right.
That was, that hunger for the divine, has always been there. I think I have reached. I'm not enlightened. There's a long way to go.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I have come to a point that I see life differently. I'm come to the point almost where everything is okay, and that's where the best thing that can happen. Everything's okay. Whatever happens, it's supposed to happen. It's fine.
Right.
And my greatest joy is my sons. I mean, they have turned out incredibly beyond my wildest expectations, and I'm so proud of them.
Oh.